My guest today is Lucy Melvin, a principal at Deloitte Consulting. Lucy, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. Back in April, President Joe Biden called for an AI talent surge. The goal is to hire 500 AI experts by the end of fiscal 2025. Now, that doesn't even include the Defense Department. We're just talking about the civilian agencies. The Defense Department could hire up to 2,500 AI experts this year alone and more than 9,000 over the next few years. Now, new data from July shows agencies have made actually more than 200 hires under this AI talent surge so far just this year. And data also shows that for jobs calling for AI or AI enabling roles across the government, those applications have more than doubled just between January and March. Now, across the government, agencies are taking steps to prepare their workforce for a future where AI is every part of every job, from IT to financial management to procurement. And of course, it's not just about hiring AI workers, it's also training existing employees for how they can best use AI capabilities to meet mission. And of course, the workforce is just a piece of this, right? How do we make the tools, the technology, everything ready to use AI tools and capabilities? Yeah. So that's where you come in, Lucy. You're going to tell us how they do this. So again, Lucy Melvin from Deloitte Consulting. Let's talk about the impacts of AI adoption across the public sector.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a really great point about the surge in AI talent and the hiring efforts that are going on right now. But what we're also seeing is a big effort to address how AI and Gen AI technologies are impacting everyone in the public sector workforce. So we know that technologies disrupt the way that we do work. And our point of view is that with AI and Gen AI technologies, they have the potential to augment and amplify the way that humans are doing their work. And this is including across the public sector workforce. So we know that AI can alleviate some of those routine and time-consuming and tedious tasks, and that it allows workers to spend more time on those more creative, higher value, and kind of more human activities. We have already seen between 2003 and 2016 that AI has allowed the federal workforce to spend 1.6% less time on below average value tasks and 4.6% more time on above average value tasks. So what that means is that we're seeing a shift already. And the new technologies that we're seeing, Gen AI enabled technologies, are going to continue that trend and likely accelerate it.
Years ago, we heard from the Office of Management and Budget this idea of using AI, using robotics process automation and intelligent automation, and we can put 100 labels on it, machine learning, to really get out of that mundaneness. And your data is really interesting because I'm sure, again, it's a few years old, but I'm sure if we looked at it again today, that impact would be even greater. When you talk to government clients, when you talk to public sector clients, is there a thirst? What's the hunger? Are they more comfortable than ever before?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there is a hunger, and that there are also really important steps that agencies and leaders are taking right now to adopt these technologies. And among those are, one thing that's really important is to empower the workforce, right? To give workers access to tools, to democratize access to AI and Gen AI tools, and to allow them to experiment and understand these technologies. Now, while they're doing that, it's also important that leaders put in place the guidelines and policies that are needed on the appropriate use. So this is something that the executive order and OMB mandates have, laid out guidance on. There are frameworks like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, Deloitte's Trustworthy AI Framework that can help leaders to put in place the policies and really the guardrails that the workforce is looking for. Because there's a hunger, but there's also an awareness that we need to be using these tools appropriately in the mission, right? And so it's important for leaders to put those policies in place and then also to focus on the AI workforce strategy. So understanding what are the skills that are needed today, what is the AI literacy and fluency that's needed across the workforce, and then what's going to be needed for the future. And this is where the hiring efforts that are happening right now are so critical to building the workforce. But we see leaders also very focused on what do I need to do to reskill and upskill my workforce.
I want to delve into the workforce. I think we'll probably spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
But let me take a half a step back.
Yeah.
A lot of agencies are, we talk about understanding the technology, democratizing it. They're setting up sandboxes, the testing, beta testing. They're
Right.
setting up areas to fail, and failure is okay in this sense.
Yeah.
Is that something that it's a typical approach to any new technology? But maybe walk me through a little bit of what's that doing for the workforce? What's that doing for making agencies more comfortable?
Yeah. Well, what that's doing is allowing for hands-on experience, right? So that's part of the importance of understanding how to use these tools and for bringing together cross-functional teams to understand and identify the best use cases. So this is another one of the things that we see as a best practice is it's important to bring together teams to identify where are the best use cases, and having these safe spaces to get hands-on experience is a part of that. And something that we see is it's important for leaders to also identify like what are not appropriate use cases for these technologies, right? Where is this something that is not going to be the right move for the organization? It's not an appropriate use in light of the mission. And another thing that's really important on that front is for leaders to be communicating about this. One of the most important things that we see in terms of appropriate adoption and really enabling the workforce is for leaders to communicate about their AI strategy. What is their strategy? What do they see as the impacts on how the mission is being delivered? And what are the impacts on the workforce? And making sure that that's a part of the leadership agenda and the discussion with the organization and with the public.
I'm glad you brought up this idea of what's the most appropriate and maybe not appropriate use cases. Many times when I talk to federal executives, there's that shiny object, meaning they have to tone down that we got to use AI. Well, what do you want to use it for, right? That's the question that always gets, and then they go, well, and then that causes that discussion.
Yeah.
What are you seeing when you see cross-agency teams coming together? Is it what we would think of, IT, finance, HR, or is it more, are they being more specific to, okay, this is an HR problem, let's bring the right people together for HR, or this is a finance problem?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to the problem you're trying to solve, right? And this is why it's important to not just get focused on shiny objects, but to really make sure that you're bringing in the right parts of the organization, given the problem that you're solving for and how you want to use the technology. And so that's where, bringing together cross-functional teams where you have the right expertise, especially when you're talking about areas of the mission or specific business processes or problems that you need people to solve, right?
I think that's great. I think be able to say no as well, because there's when any new technology pops in, first of all, too often people are saying, no, not at all. But going back to your leadership, they have to communicate the importance of it. So they have to say, okay, here's how we want to use it for now, and then we'll see where it takes us in the future. Yeah. That communication piece is so important. It's got to be more than just the deputy secretary, the secretary, even the CIO or the chief AI officer going, yeah, let's use it. Yay, everybody. Like, what kind of communication have you seen works?
Yeah, I think that this is where the focus on enabling the workforce and really the literacy and fluency pieces is important, because a big part of the communication is giving access to information about what these technologies are, how they can be used, and how they're impacting the way work is being done. And that does require both leadership communicating, but also, that kind of cascading across the organization is important. And that's where, what we're seeing is leaders bringing together their leadership teams and having those strategic discussions about how they're going to use AI and Gen AI, and then looking at what that means for the organization and what they need to communicate to the broader workforce. It's like everything that's a critical part of a leadership agenda, you have to communicate that in order to see it come to fruition.
You have to tell them what's important, tell them why it's important, and then tell them what's important again. It's 101 communication. I just want to ask one last bit about the leadership piece, because, hey, we put the strategy out. Hey, I gave a speech about it. Hey, I encouraged everyone. it's the constant communication has to happen. And I think it has to happen at the right level. So not just with the C-suite or not just with the leadership group, but it's really got to flow down. Are there things you're seeing within the public sector about good examples that come to mind about how things actually flow down, how they're, the brown bag lunch, the newsletter, what's working?
Well, so, examples of this where I think when we look at how agencies are trying to adopt some of the new kind of work assistants, like Microsoft Copilot, that are more broad-based, it's important that they identify kind of different personas in the organization and they understand how they can use the tools and then get the right information out, not just at the C-suite level, but cascading that through leadership to managers within teams and divisions and different parts of the organization, and giving people the tools that they need to understand how to apply this. The other part of communication that we sometimes forget is opening up the dialogue two-way. So it's important for leaders to be inviting their teams to share their ideas and to ask questions. This, to your point, putting out a strategy is not enough. What we see as more effective is when there's discussion and there's two-way communication.
The asking questions, understanding what's important, why it's important, where it can go with it, I think that sometimes is overlooked and underappreciated. Are there times when, or are there things that come to mind about what leadership, where they've kind of created artificial barriers? Because the risk aversion nature of federal employees, right? You hear this in procurement all the time. Well, if the FAR doesn't say you can't do it, you can do it. Well, I don't know, the IG or the GAO or Congress, it's not you getting, Lucy, you're not getting hauled up before the committee, it's me. How do they create that, lower that risk aversion?
Well, I think that's where democratizing access to this technology is so important. And what we talked about earlier of, thinking about things like putting in place sandboxes where people can experiment and then ask questions, and that can help them to identify, things that they may not have anticipated, and, creating that expectation that employees are part of the creation, the testing, and ultimately, if there are decisions to move forward with things, the implementation and adoption of them.
As you were talking to federal leaders, and we're coming up on a break, so I think what's interesting here is, as you talk to federal leaders, do they get that communication, how important that is? We always talk about change management, we talk about technology, and it's never the technology, it's the change management. It's the same thing here with AI, it's never the technology. Well, in some cases it is, but
exactly. In some cases,
And when it comes to Gen AI and being, but do they get the importance of the communication side?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're seeing a lot more communication about this. The reality is we know that this is, this technology is permeating our entire economy. So, why leaders are communicating is because they have workers coming to them saying, I'm using these tools in my personal life. How can we be applying them to work more effectively and bringing forward those ideas?
I think that's a key piece to understand. If I'm using it internally, it's like cell phones were 10, 15, 20 years ago. I use it, why can't I have it at work? Same issue. Lucy, we're going to take a quick break. We can come back. We'll jump into the workforce discussion, how leaders and others can prepare their workforces to use these tools. First, as I said, we'll take a quick break. My guest today is Lucy Melvin, a principal at Deloitte Consulting. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to the discussion, AI and Human Capital, Refining Collaboration in the Public Sector, sponsored by Deloitte on Federal News Network. Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion, AI and Human Capital, Refining Collaboration in the Public Sector, sponsored by Deloitte on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Lucy Melvin, a principal at Deloitte Consulting. Lucy, before break, we're talking a lot about the need for communication, this need for understanding, the kind of testing out what's the appropriate use case, what's a not appropriate use case. You also highlighted this idea that AI and AI tools, capabilities are already having an impact on the federal workforce, the federal mission. What are some of those common use cases you're seeing today? I know one of them may be robotics process automation is a good one, but give me a bunch that you think are really starting to have that impact.
Yeah. Sure, Jason. Well, I mean, one, I'm glad you pointed out robotics process automation and RPA, because I think sometimes with all the attention around Gen AI, we're forgetting that AI is on a continuum, and that across government, organizations have been on the journey of adopting these technologies over time, and it's already making an impact on how the workforce is delivering their mission. When we look at RPA, for example, we've seen a lot of application around just making processes more efficient, especially in back office organizational functions. So, thinking about finance and procurement and HR and those areas where things are really process intensive, and there's a lot of opportunity that we've seen where organizations are working more efficiently using AI tools. When we look at generative AI and the potential in the future, there are a lot of common activities and types of work that are done across government that have that potential as well. So things like report generation, case management, knowledge management, as well as where we're seeing things advance in data analytics. So there, if you look at the example of report generation, across the federal government, there's a lot of time and energy spent by the workforce generating reports. And that's important. There are stakeholders in Congress and the public that need information about the work that the government is doing. But there's potential for generative AI tools to really augment the way humans are doing that work and give them more time to focus on the strategic initiatives. So, they can ingest documentation, things like status reports, email information, data, and then help to generate draft reports that then a human will need to verify the accuracy and really focus on the messaging. But it allows the human to focus on those more critical tasks and then to have more time to spend on the actual work of implementing and driving those initiatives. So those are the kinds of impacts that we see starting to happen and expect are going to accelerate.
Let me just tag back to the RPA piece.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting bots put out in the procurement community, contract closeout bots, looking at bids, make sure that they're not missing, you forgot to check this box, or you forgot to sign, or something very basic, but would take a human, gotta look through each page.
It's tedious work. Yeah, exactly. There's great examples of that kind of time-intensive, tedious, and monotonous work being alleviated by RPA. And that creates changes for workers, but it also allows them to focus on the type of work that people fundamentally enjoy more. What's interesting is, as we look at those shifts happening, both with RPA and other AI and Gen AI tools, what I'm hearing from leaders is a recognition that this means that they have to think about skills that they need in their organization, not just technical skills, but also other what we call kind of enduring human skills. So things like communication skills, leadership skills, critical thinking. And that is something that when we talk about the workforce strategy that government organizations need, it really requires them stepping back and thinking about how these changes are impacting work over time and how they're impacting the workforce.
We're going to get to the workforce in a second. I just want to tag back to one more thing. When it comes to Gen AI, a lot of excitement over it, a lot of excitement probably over the last year or so, but not a lot of use. Are you starting to see Gen AI really play a role in case management, knowledge management, report generation, or is that still in that early stages of, well, let's test it, let's do it in the sandbox, and again, every agency is different. There's not one size fits all. I get all that.
Right. Exactly. I mean, every agency is at a different point in their journey, but we are seeing a lot of interest and exploration of those things, as well as, some agencies making moves in those directions.
And I think as they get more comfortable with Gen AI and as the large language models get better, there'll be more uses of that. The one thing that I think we have to maybe hit upon and just remind folks, human will always be in the loop.
Yeah.
I think that's really key. And no one's losing their job. I find it still hard to believe that even when we talk about RPA, sometimes federal executives or industry will tell me, yeah, there's still a lot of concern about people losing their jobs. I'm like, the government doesn't have enough people. Who's going to lose their job anyways?
Right. I think that's where, our point of view is that this is really about amplifying humans' ability to deliver work and augmenting human work. And that, I would agree, when I talk to leaders across government, their challenge is having enough workforce to deliver the mission. And so they're looking at how can they identify these tools in order to allow them to do the mission that they're charged with the workforce that they have. So right now, that's why adoption of these tools is so important and really focusing on that as part of the strategy.
It's a great segue into the workforce strategy itself. I think there's two pieces here. I talked at the beginning about the tech surge that's happening. Mm-hmm. What's it mean to hire from the outside? What are agencies looking for? What are some of those trends? And we'll talk about the other piece, which is almost probably even more important, the upskill and reskill piece. But let's talk about bringing AI experts in.
Yeah, I think we've seen some really innovative things happening and great progress on that front. The thing that I hear from a lot of leaders is the desire to look at how can they better partner with academic institutions, how can they create pathways to bring in the right talent. And I think that's where we've seen some of the innovative programs helping with that, but there's an appetite to do more.
And I think a lot of times it requires agencies, HR people, hiring managers to think a little differently. Wait a minute, you don't have a degree in AI, whatever that means.
Right.
You are a data analyst or a data scientist, or you're just somebody whose expertise lies in this mission area that happens to understand data too, and you could be quote unquote an AI expert. Is that change starting to happen, that rethinking of it? You see it in cyber, but is it happening in AI?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of what we've seen in cyber starting to happen as agencies are looking at increasing AI talent. And that was a clear charge of the executive order, but how to do that requires thinking differently about, who has the right skills and experience and how to hire them in.
We should give the Biden administration, OPM and OMB, a lot of credit for really rethinking how they're doing recruitment. I know the Tech to Gov events that they've held over the last year or so have really brought in a whole new set of people, and they're trying to do more to reach different audiences. And we could go down a whole path of remote work too, but
exactly.
We won't get into
There's
that,
a lot of changes that have been happening when we look across the government workforce in recent years, and I think there's just a lot of progress happening on that front.
The other side of the coin, of course, is the current employees. Hey, don't forget about me.
Yeah.
I want to use these tools and I don't want to be left out, and I don't want to do these mundane work or low value work. What's the reskilling, upskilling? What's the trend you're seeing there?
Yeah. I think the trend that we're seeing is that part of the AI strategy has to be the workforce enablement. It has to be the workforce strategy that enables AI adoption. And that includes thinking about, what is the kind of broad-based literacy that you need across the workforce, and that goes back to what we've talked about in terms of, democratizing access to the information and the chance to get hands-on experience. And then it also requires really investing in building the fluency. So some parts of the workforce, like in the tech workforce, people are going to need to really augment their skills, upskill and reskill. And that investment, we're starting to see efforts happen, and it's a really critical part of this change.
You use the word investment. I'll nitpick at you a little bit. Are you seeing funding for this? I know you didn't mean it that way, but a lot of agencies are cutting training, or their training's flat. And there's always a lot of training that's needed, whether procurement or wherever. But are you starting to see some investment from agencies in that training?
So I think that's the challenge that agencies are facing right now, is that there's a huge need for workforce reskilling and upskilling and ongoing workforce development, and they are facing, budget challenges.
Yeah. I was just did a story the other day about a potential furlough happening at an agency, and they said, listen, we've cut training or cut most training, and that hurts the workforce to deal with these issues that you bring up.
Yeah.
we've seen other attempts to deal with upskilling and reskilling. You also mentioned some of these, not just the tech skills, but the softer skills, I'll call them. You mentioned communication skills, critical thinking skills. That's really what I think most people join the government for. No one joins the government to look at lines of code.
To do tedious
exactly.
work.
What goes into that challenge? Can you teach someone to think critically? Isn't that just natural? Does it happen over time?
Right. Well, and that is the challenge. An important part of thinking about the workforce strategy is really understanding what the impact on jobs looks like, and then thinking about the career paths that workers are going to have and how that's changing. And we're just starting to see this because I think organizations are at the point of just understanding, okay, what is the potential with this technology? What are we doing today? How do we see that changing? And what does that mean for how we're going to develop our people and build those skills over time?
And this goes back to something we talked about earlier, which is the communication and the leadership piece. If those leaders are not communicating in a way that says, we need you to do these things, we will help you do these things. Otherwise, the workforce just goes, they told me to do AI, I don't know anything about AI.
Right.
Connect those kind of two dots from the leadership to the workforce to make sure, because otherwise something fails in the middle.
Yeah. Well, and part of that is communicating the expectations, right? Not everyone needs to become an expert in AI, right? But they need to understand the basics. And that's what we see, organizations trying to do across the board is provide more access to that information. And then identify who needs to have more in-depth knowledge, right?
Lucy, we're almost out of time, so before I let you go, I'm going to give you a chance to, we've talked about a lot of different pieces and parts of this AI adoption, the move towards AI, getting the workforce ready. What's the most important message you want to leave with the audience about, hey, as you go down this path, here's something to consider or keep in mind?
Yeah. I think it really comes back to our discussion around workforce enablement and the fact that an AI strategy has to have an AI workforce strategy that accompanies it. That's really critical to leadership understanding and being able to communicate to the organization where they're going and what they need of staff and what they're going to do to support them in their broad career development.
And as we've seen over the years, no matter how great your technology is, if the people don't know how to use it,
it's not going to do anything.
And they won't use it.
Yeah, exactly.
Lucy, I very much enjoyed our conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So let me thank my guest. Lucy Melvin is a principal at Deloitte Consulting. Lucy, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion AI and Human Capital, Redefining Collaboration in the Public Sector, sponsored by Deloitte on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, go to federalnewsnetwork.com and search Deloitte.